Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to Kim Brown. Kim, you may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Population Estimates and Projections. My name is Kim Brown, and I'm a training specialist here at the Census Bureau. I want to thank you for joining us today for the Back to Data Basics webinar series. The series was created by the Census Bureau team, the Census Academy team here at the Census Bureau. You can register for any of the webinars at the Census Bureau homepage. Just visit census.gov/academy. We think these webinars will be a valuable opportunity for you to learn from our experts about how to access and utilize a variety of Census Bureau data products, tools, and resources. Before I introduce today's speaker, let's go over a few important housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be posted to our Census Academy site within 30 business days. We'll post all supplemental materials, including the PowerPoint slides. In terms of how to ask questions during the webinar, you can submit your written questions using the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom center or right of your WebEx screen. Please take a moment to locate that now. Once you've found the Q&A panel, make sure you choose All Panelists from the drop-down menu. This will ensure we see your question. Don't send your question to an individual panelist. Also, we ask that you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. Now let's talk about the chat panel. Look for that on your screen now. It's probably right next to the Q&A panel. Definitely keep that chat panel open also, because this is where we will provide key links and other resources. Keep in mind, you won't be able to respond to the chat. Chat is just for us to send you links and other resources. In the chat box, we will be sending you, sharing throughout the webinar the link for the question web or our evaluation. We are very interested in hearing from you on how we're doing. My colleagues, Viviana Garcia and Carol Miller, will be monitoring the Q&A panel. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the Q&A panel, or we will share your questions with the presenter to respond to after the presentation. If we don't get to all questions with a response during the webinar, we will post the questions and responses with the webinar materials within 30 business days. Lastly, near the end of the webinar, we will put into chat our evaluation link so you can tell us how we did today. We hope you'll take the time to complete, as we are always looking for ways to improve our training. As you know, we are in a virtual and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser. Please consider logging out and coming back into the session. Now I would like to introduce our speaker, Lacey Lofton. Thanks again for being here. Lacey, you may begin.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kim. I'm lucky enough to have a really awesome team working on this project with me. We've been working together for a really long time, and I am excited to be part of this webinar series for the year, and excited about this presentation in particular, because I think there's some unique and new things that we're doing for this vintage group of estimates. If you do have questions, as Kim mentioned, please type them in the chat. I'm going to make sure that we have enough time to address those that come up consistently or regularly, so we can make sure that we answer those. And then anything else I will follow up with this weekend. I think there's probably going to be a lot of detailed questions that apply to data you might be specifically looking for or that apply to just unique geographies. Those we'll address after the fact, but I promise we will get to you. Just to get started, what we're going to talk about today, or the agenda for the presentation. First, we're going to talk about the Population Estimates Program, just the program overall. We'll talk specifically about the population estimates that we produce at the Census Bureau, and then we'll talk about projections. We will talk about how to access that data, and then we'll go into some additional resources that are available not only for these data sets and for these programs, but just from the Census Bureau in general. The Population Estimates Program is one that I feel like is a little, we overlook it sometimes. It's a really important program. There's a lot tied to it, but we do so many surveys and we do so many censuses, which I'm sure most of you know about, that sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. But the Population Estimates Program was really designed to fill the gaps between the decennial censuses. So as most of you, I'm sure, as data users understand, decennial census data can get stale really quickly. And while we have lots of different surveys and programs that fill those gaps, the Population Estimates Program is the one that is required by law and is the main program that disseminates the official intercensal data for most geographies in the country. So when you see an official population for a year that does not end in 0, that's coming from this program. These are the numbers that are used to distribute billions of dollars in federal funding between the censuses. We have here 67 billion. I feel like every time I type in a number, it's almost obsolete immediately because that number is constantly increasing. So for intercensal years, that is the main population component used for distribution of federal funds. And it's also used by the Census Bureau and other agencies as a major control because it's such an accurate estimate. It is such an important one that we use it to actually control some of our other surveys. Noteworthy, the American Community Survey, the Current Population Survey, but also federal agencies use these numbers as well to make sure that they're on track with some of their other programs. The current estimates that are available are for July 1st of 2021. July 1st is our main release date. We actually have a release coming up in March, March 24th, I believe, that we'll talk about more. These estimates go all the way back to 1900, and I'll show you where to find these. The one thing I will caution you on, we produce vintages. You'll hear that word a lot during this presentation. A vintage talks about the 10-year block in which these are produced in between censuses. So right now we're going to be looking at the 2020 vintage. So, the last decade we're looking at 2010. So when you're looking over time, just remember that some of the methodologies may have changed. Some of the data, because they're usually very comparable to the previous decennial census, may change. But we do have information going all the way back to 1900. And we actually have it in a really human-friendly, easily accessible format on our website, which is always a nice thing to have. Some of our stuff you have to go find a really dusty book in the bottom of a basement in a library somewhere. These are available on our website. And just as a quick, level setting of how many geographies we produce these for, I think that's something that's missed a lot too. We produce estimates every single year through this program for 80,000 areas in the United States and Puerto Rico. So it's a massive program. It produces a lot of estimates that are used for really important projects and funding. This is a quick overview of what is and is not available through the Population Estimates Program. So there is no social information that is available through this program. So that would be things like education, whether you're enrolled in school or what your educational attainment is. It doesn't have information about where people work or how they're living. Do they rent or own? Do they, how do you get to work? That information is not here. We have other sources for social data that are excellent, and I'll touch on those later. What we do have from the Population Estimates Program, and for those of you who are familiar with the decennial census, this is going to look really familiar, are the demographic components that you see here. So total population, pretty straightforward. We have age of people in an area. We also have Hispanic origin and race. And let me pause there for a minute and just talk about what those two different categories are. So for Hispanic origin, we ask in this it's a calculation, but for the purposes of the federal government, you are either Hispanic or Latino or you are not. So those two data points will always add up to 100%. You're either Hispanic, Latino, or not. So 100% for those two data points. For race, we have four categories. Well, I should say four main categories. We have white, Black, Asian, and then Native American or Pacific Islander. Then we also have an other category where you can actually write in a race that you feel better applies to you. So that's race and Hispanic origin. They are asked completely separately. And while Hispanic origin adds up to 100%, race does not, because a lot of people in this country, and more so, identify as more than one race. So that can be really confusing if you're looking at this data and wondering why the race data doesn't add up to 100%. So that's actually one of the questions I get the most. Wanted to touch on that and make sure that we covered what those two different categories were. We have information on sex. Then we have components that we use for this formula. So births, deaths, and net migration, which is always hard for me to say for some reason. We have information on people living in group quarters and what type of group quarters they are. So are they institutionalized? Are they civilian non-institutionalized? And then universes. And we'll go into this a little bit more when we're actually looking at the data. No information on economics, so that would be like, you know, how people are receiving income, things like that. We don't have any of that information here. And then for housing, we just have total housing units. Here are the geographies we published this data for. Today, we're mostly going to be focusing on the nation, states, and counties. Those are just the most commonly used data points from this program. But we do produce for incorporated places. That's our cool, dorky government way of just saying a city or a town. So they're called different things in different places. So an incorporated place is just a city or a town. We do produce it for minor civil divisions, and then also for metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. For Puerto Rico, we have the same equivalents, and these are produced every single year. So like I said, we're about to release, it comes out on a flow basis, but we produce data for each of these geographies every single year. For the United States, we publish all of the data points that you're going to see here, right? It's a big place. We're able to publish it. So we'll publish total resident population, components of change, population characteristics, monthly population, so we even tell you how many people are estimated in the country every year through this program, and then housing units. You can use this table. I'm not going to go through it in extreme detail, but the more detailed the data is, the fewer numbers of geographies we will be able to publish it for. So when you see down here, monthly population is only produced for the nation. Specific population characteristics are not produced for micro and metropolitan statistical areas or cities and towns. We have a really awesome, so we're going to go into a lot of depth here about the methodology behind it and what's published and how, but we actually have a really great 15-page document. If anyone's interested, I'll put it in the chat in a little bit. If you really want to know the ins and outs and the very specifics of each of these things and why, there's a great document to help you with that. But here are the basics. So, and we'll dive into each of these categories. So in order to produce these estimates, we start with a base population. Then we add, this is not the most complex equation on the surface, but it gets complicated when you get into some of the details. So we'll start with the base population, and then we'll add births for the area. We'll subtract deaths, and then we'll add in net migration, and that gets you the population estimate for whichever geography you're specifically looking at. Let's look at each of these in turn. It got a little more complicated. There was this global pandemic recently, made things a little more difficult. So I'm going to talk about how that affected how we produce estimates now, and the different components that go into it. Normally, the base population for a vintage, so again, this would be vintage 2020, which we'll be using all the way through 2030, is the decennial census. We ran into some serious issues with this decennial census. There were three major issues with using the 2020 decennial census as a base population. The first one is that we are using this actually really cool disclosure avoidance. We're calculating disclosure avoidance in a different way and producing our data in a slightly different way. But for this program, there was an impact on some of the variables we need as the base of these estimates. Specifically, I mentioned earlier race, how we produce the modified race. variable, which is like some other race when you write it in. That's something we're doing differently, which was going to make it difficult to use the decennial census for these estimates. Also the master address file, so just every identification of housing units and some of the boundaries associated with those are not being published in the same way. So that was another problem for actually pairing some of these data points. And then record linkages as well. So those were some of the problems associated with avoidance disclosure or disclosure avoidance with our differential privacy. Second was that the pandemic not only delayed our operations in collecting data for a lot of fairly obvious reasons at this point, but it also created a delay in our ability to tabulate and then publish and create the data sets from the 2020 census. So that was a big part. So literally when we started producing the estimates for these programs for 2020, we didn't have the census data that we would have needed to use that as a base. And then third, which is an important one as well, because we didn't have any time built in there, we didn't have the decennial census numbers, we weren't able to do the analysis to make sure that they were usable for the purposes of creating these estimates. So what we did instead was created a new blend of 3 different data sets in order to create this base population for this vintage. So we did start with the 2020 census, so the redistricting data, so the PL 94-171, for those of you who are really into to data and census products. We did use that. So for the nation, state, and counties, we used those as the base, just population counts, just pure population counts. For the demographic analysis, that's the yellow one there, the DA 2020. We use those for national population estimates by age and sex. The demographic analysis file is actually something that we produce in order to see how well we did the census in a lot of ways. So we are producing this from administrative records mostly, but it's a really accurate, really important database. So we use that one as an input as well. And last but not least, we use the 2020. After every decennial census, we also have a release from this program that helps us analyze how we did. So we use that 2020 post-census population estimates data set as well. So between the 3 of those, we use them for different sources. So the decennial was really the main population. This is more of a national level. Age and sex detail comes from the demographic analysis. And then information on race, Hispanic origin, that kind of detail comes from the 2020 estimates. So that is the base. I'm actually going to go back in time here. So that's this population base. This is the very first one. We're going to walk through every single one of these, but that was a big and a major change. The rest of it will probably look more familiar. For births and deaths, we received most of that information from NCHS, so the National Center for Health Statistics. For births, we get information on the date of birth of a child. These are from administrative records. The sex of the child, the residence and age of the mother, and that's something that's actually a question we get a lot, is how do you identify where people are born? It is the place of residence of the parent, especially in more rural areas. Sometimes a child is born in a hospital can be fairly far away from, where the parents live. They're counted where the mother's residence is. And then race and Hispanic origin of both the mother and father. And that's the data we use to define the race and Hispanic origin of the child. For death data, much less cute and fun than the birth data, but we have the date of death, sex of the person who is deceased, the residence or location of the person who passed away, the age they were at the time, and then race and Hispanic origin. For the FSCPE, and I have been worried all day that I would forget this acronym because it did not fit in this PowerPoint presentation, but it is the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates. And so every state has a main contact and different ways of collecting data that they are good enough to share with the Census Bureau that we use to distribute. So we'll have these, vital statistics for states or counties. And then the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates will receive data from those from each state. And that helps us distribute those births and deaths within counties and in those lower level geographies. Group quarters. this is kind of a unique subset of the population estimates program, but I wanted to make sure we touched on it. I'm looking at the wrong slide. Sorry. Net migration first. Net migration for domestic migration. We get information from the Internal Revenue Services. That's the main data set that we use for people under the age of 64. For people over the age of 65, we focus on Medicare enrollment data. For Social Security, we also use Social Security Administration. They have a numbering system that we use to be able to pair a lot of this different data, so we use that as a file as well. And then changes in group quarters population, which is the slide that I already skipped ahead to in my head. We'll go back to that. We do realize that, not everyone files taxes, not everyone files exemptions. That is also the case for anybody over 65. It is not every single person age of 65 and older is enrolled in Medicare. But they are very, very strong data sets, and we fill some of those gaps with understanding the universes of those age groups and doing some imputation. So for foreign-born immigrants or immigration into the U.S., we use ACS residents from 1 year ago. So if anybody, ACS is the American Community Survey, if anybody has been lucky enough to be involved in ACS or get a questionnaire sent to their house or they're filling it out online, one of the questions we ask is, where did you live last year? Did you live in the same residence? If the answer is no, we ask, did you live in the same county? If the answer is no, we ask, did you live in the same state? If the answer is no, we ask, do you live in the same country? And if the answer is no, we ask, where did you move from? So we'll use that data point to track people that are moving into the country. And then finally, we get information from the Defense Manpower Data Center, which is just a very cool sounding data center. It makes me feel like the Census Bureau needs to make our data centers sound a little cooler than we currently have the names for, but we use information from that database to understand not only about the military personnel moving in and out of the country, but also the dependents coming with them. I'm going to pause for a second. Vivian or Carol, is there anything that's coming up over and over again that you want me to address before I just get way ahead of myself? I'm already ahead of myself in slides. Okay, you can always interrupt me if there's something that's coming down. Here is the slide I thought I was going to be talking about a second ago. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that.
Hi, Carol.
Define vintage just one more time.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated term. It'll be a little more clear when we get to the webpage. So vintage is for 2010. We use that base population that was from the 2010 census for the next 10 years. So all the population estimates, even though they were for different years, were 2010 basis. So that's that vintage. For now, we're doing 2020. The base is a little different, but that's going to be this vintage. When we're looking at the data sets in a little bit, I think it's going to make a lot more sense, so I'll go more into it then. But it's basically that 10-year, another word would probably be cohort. So it's those intercensus years, like that 10-year grouping. Anything else? Okay, excellent. So here's the group quarter slide I was apparently really excited to get to and just flew past the others. We collect data intercensually from lots of different administrative agencies, including correctional institutions, juvenile institutions, nursing homes. Then we have a broad category of other institutionalized facilities. We also get information from college dormitories, military housing, and then other non-institutional facilities. We assume that these populations are static unless we get input from one of our administrative partners that tells us something has changed. And while we do not annually release information on each of these different types of group quarters, what we do is we'll produce them at a more broad level. So one of the, I'm going to probably say this not exactly correctly, but like we'll have more broad categories that are like, it'll be non-institutionalized civilians in group quarters. So there are larger categories than these specifically, but not these actual individual. This is how we collect them. It's not how we tabulate them. In order to produce these estimates, and we're almost to the end of the estimates part of this program, it's a top-down approach. So we start at the national level and we'll produce population information, obviously, but then also age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin for the country. We actually produce that every single month. Then we go down to the counties and we'll produce estimates for the counties. with those inputs that we talked about, and then we have those counties add up to the state population. That's how we create the state population. Age, race, sex, and Hispanic origin are then created for states and counties. So we start with populations totals, and then we come back and calculate the age, race, sex, and Hispanic origin. And then because we're doing these calculations independently, and a key principle of the estimates program is that they have to be consistent. What that means is you can't have every county in a state add up to a different number than the state total. We'll do some recalculations to make sure that basically those higher level geographies equal the sum of the parts. Here's the release schedule, and it's fun doing a presentation right before there is a major release, and there is a major release coming up. So the 1st of July, the 7th month is July, right? 7th is July. I think 7th is July. July 1st is our main and biggest release for this program, but we do have several others throughout the year. So we're on March 24th. So just 2 weeks away, we're going to be releasing a lot of information. So we'll have county population. We actually have micropolitan and metropolitan areas as well from March of 2020, which will fill, we haven't published that in almost 2 years. So that'll be an excellent release. There's a lot of attention around that one. And here's just some of the more specific and more lower level releases that will be coming up as well. When I walk you through this website, I'll show you where all of these are, and more specific dates come out sometimes as we get closer to release dates, so we'll make sure you know how to find them. Here's a simple screenshot of the webpage, but we're going to walk through this. I assume we have time. There is we'll put this slide out on Census Academy in the next few weeks, but there's the website. We'll walk through it together. Population projections are a really interesting area. We produce population projections. Again, we have that base of the decennial census or the population base that we're talking about for 2020. And while there are some fundamental and very obvious differences, like one is, stating what is happening now or what has happened in the very recent past, and projections are in the future, in a lot of ways, they're the same type of product. They are calculated based on several inputs and several different assumptions. So we're going to walk through, in this case, some of just the really cool data that was released about a year and a half ago, looking at projections for the country over the next, through 2060, so the next 40-ish years. And then I'll show you where these are on our website as well, and make sure that you know how to get new updates and anything that comes out. These are from some publications that I'm literally going to share in the presentation later. So these are just some of my favorites. Here are the projections for the older population. I don't think this is going to shock anyone. The United States has an aging population. A lot of countries around the world do as well. But there's some really cool turning points here. So by 2030, every baby boomer in the country will be older than 65. So that is a major turning point for us. And that means that 1 in 5 Americans will be at retirement age. So 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. Also, same year, it's a big year for demographics in this country as a result of the aging population, which means there are more deaths, but then also fertility rates are dropping for just overall people in the U.S. For the first time in the nation's history, that's not true. Sorry, the first time, no. So as of 2030, we're going to switch back. So I totally misspoke. There's not the first time in history. It's the first time in recent history that natural increase will be lower than immigration as a mover for population increase. And what's most noteworthy, at least to me, and this is just my personal opinion, is that's happening despite immigration levels being pretty stagnant. So they are relatively flat in our projections, even all the way through 2060. But because we have lower fertility rates, because we have an older population with more deaths, that is going to become the main driver of population growth in the country. Something else that I think is interesting and isn't specifically reflected in this slide is that the United States is going to be one of the few countries in kind of in Europe and Canada and Mexico, and yeah, most of Europe, actually, like Germany, England, I was reading this whole list earlier, that is going to continue increasing in population through 2060. So we're really unique in that way. We are with an influx of people and natural immigration and migration to the country, we will continue to grow while most countries who don't have that will not. And then another major point that I want to point out that is demonstrated on this graph is that by 2034, I'll make sure I'm saying that right. Yeah, by 2034, the older adults will outnumber children in the country for the first time in U.S. history. That's the one that's the first time in U.S. history. So we will have more people over the age of 65 than we will have children under the age of 18. There's a lot of reasons for this. Again, fertility rates are falling, but people are living longer. I can't remember the exact number, but the percentage of people who will be 80 or over in 1960 is staggeringly higher than it is now, and certainly has been in the past. So that's the first time that we're turning that point in the nation's history. Well, I'm going to finish these slides on the projections and we'll ask for any questions. Dependency, this is another thing that's changing for most of the same reasons. I thought it was noteworthy in 1960, there were about 2 children for every 3 people of working age. So like working age adults comparatively had about 2 children. By 2060, so a century later, it'll be 1. So it's going to be half the number of children for every person who is a working age adult. But you can see here too, right at 2034, where we switch over which group of dependents is larger in the United States. So all the way up through 2030, it is still children. I've got a 6-year-old who is proving it to me every day. But then we'll have the older population taking over as the percentage and hard number as well of people that are dependent in the United States. So these are shifts that we've already seen. So like Japan is actually very similar right now to how we will be in 2060. But it's really interesting and a really unique phenomenon that we're seeing here. The foreign-born population, when we look into the data tools, there's going to be some really cool information I'll show you here. But I wanted to share this as well because we are talking about migration becoming the main force in population growth while we stagnate in some other areas. So it's not, it's one of those things people, at least mine is, my memory is short, but we were at a historic low in 1974, I think was the actual number here. It probably says somewhere in here and I'm just missing it. But we're going to be back up. So by 2020, we were already over 13%, and we're projecting by 2060 that the percentage of foreign-born in the country will be 17. Okay, national increase versus international immigration. You can see this change here as well. It's kind of staggering to me how quickly this happened. So at 2017, we're still natural increase is 1.4, net international is 1, and it really holds stable. So, net international immigration stays right around 1, but the natural increase is falling so rapidly. So by 2050, we're looking at 0.4%. So it's a full percentage lower than we have just about now. So just something to keep in mind. Again, it's shocking to me to see that international immigration stays the same, and yet so percentagely increases over natural increase in the United States. We have several different ways that we calculate our projections. We have a high immigration scenario, a low immigration scenario, and a 0, and then a mean, which is our best estimate of what we actually expect to happen. One of the things that's hard with population projections is it hasn't happened yet, right? So there are a lot of things that can affect this, not only just the data inputs that we have, but natural disasters, policy, different things that are happening around the world. I'm really excited about the new ACS data coming out and some of the things we'll be looking at in the next couple of years after the pandemic, right? There are things that you can't predict when you're making these projections. So I don't want to go too far into depth here, but I did want to point out that we do produce 4 different numbers. So 0 immigration scenario is like if we had no immigration going forward, low immigration, high, and then main. And you'll see here by 2060, if we had 0 immigration, we would be losing population in the United States. And that is the situation that a lot of countries around the world will be in. This is just a hierarchy. I thought it was really interesting how different these two were. So the main series, again, our best estimate of how the population will change by millions compared to 0 immigration. I don't think I actually have it here. This is for 1960. But there's just a really dramatic difference. So if you see it's kind of like a reverse Christmas tree at the top here for zero immigration. We've got the baby boomer population there is like the widest section, and then it would taper off really quickly because we expect there to be immigration into the United States over time. So the left chart or graph here, chart or graph shows that it's a much more stable population because of that input of extra human beings from other areas instead of natural increase within the United States. Okay, I'm pausing there because next I'm going live on the website. Viviana, Carol, is there anything that's come up a bunch that I should address before I do that?
Lacey, we have several questions about geography,
Okay.
particularly the differences between, say, CDPs and unincorporated places,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
metropolitan and city and towns, metropolitan areas versus city and towns, and how do we get the GEIS data?
Ooh, good questions. Okay, so I'm writing this down really quickly. Carol, you talk a lot. I'm a really slow writer. So CDPs, places. So I'm going to give you just a really quick overview of geography, and then we have some awesome resources on our website, recorded webinars that will go into a lot of depth about how to get shape files, depending on what you're looking for, any geography that you need. So to start with, a census, let me back up. A place, you know what, I'm going to go back to, no, I'm not. So when we're talking about producing data for places, that is an incorporated place. So the city of Houston is a great example. Any city that is incorporated and has a mayor, has a functioning government, that is an incorporated place. An unincorporated place may even look and feel the same, but it doesn't actually have a government that is specifically attached to that geography. So sometimes, and for those of you who are familiar with Texas, Houston is an incorporated place. It has a mayor. It is a city. Just north of Houston, the Woodlands is a massive development that definitely has a sense of look and feel. And when you get your mail in the Woodlands, it says the Woodlands, but it's not actually incorporated. Most of its services and things like that go through the county. A lot of people that live there don't even know that. I met a guy who thought he was the mayor or knew the mayor of the Woodlands. The difference is one is incorporated, one is not. For statistical purposes, we produce data the same way for each of them. So if you are an actual place, if you are a city, we produce data for you. If you are not incorporated, we do our best to work with local officials to create boundaries for that census-designated place. We call it a census-designated place. We name it what residents there understand the name to be, and then we produce data for it just like we do for cities. So you'll see that here. For metro and micropolitan statistical areas, I'm really afraid I'm going to screw up the agency here. I think it's OMB that actually qualifies those. So those are just geographies that the Census Bureau ingests based on another agency's definitions and requirements. But we have a really good working paper on that somewhere that I can make sure that anybody has. So all of these geographies are different. We have so many geographies in the country, both statistical and political. We have hours worth of really good presentations on our website. I'll show you before we close out, but there's some of the basics. Any follow-ups there, Carol, that I could specifically address? Geographies are really cool but complex. It's a very cool topic, but it's a little in depth.
Definitely in depth, yes. And I have one here. Any idea when the National Population Projection Table will be released? The last I've seen is 2017.
It is. So 2017 is the most recent, and we do, even these papers that I was taking the screenshots from because they were so good, were released in 2020, but they were based on that 2017. I don't have a date for you. I went back and checked again this morning with, I think, some of the delays in the decennial census releases, and some of that were some of the inputs that we normally have aren't there yet, so we don't have some of those timelines yet. But I will show you where you can find those when they are available. And actually, just one of the ways that you can sign up is through our email list. It keeps you up to date on any releases we have. And I promise it's not actually one of those that overwhelms you with emails you don't want. It's really good about kind of sticking to the high points. And it's like every week it'll tell you the main things that are coming out. And right at the top will be the most important or the most often accessed data sets that are going to be released. Anything else before I jump into the websites here?
Real quick, when you refer to senior population and younger population, you're talking 65 and older and 18 and below, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for that. I should have said that. Yeah. So from again, from a federal government perspective, those are the thresholds. I have parents that would argue that 65 is the wrong number, but yes, for statistical purposes, 65 and older, and then 18 and younger. We do produce data to a more granular level with certainly the decennial census and some of our other data sources, which I'm going to touch on as well. But for the purposes of this, for the estimates in this program, those are the main thresholds. Thank you, Carol. I would have totally just zoomed past that one.
Okay, and I think some of the others are a little more in depth that we need later discussion on. So
yeah, absolutely. This is such a detailed topic that I will make sure that any questions you have, if we don't answer them here today, I will get them answered by Monday at the very latest. All right, let's back out of here. Hopefully most of you are familiar with our website. We have this cool new blue, and we're constantly updating the format and the layout and some of the navigation as well. But I'm going to highlight just some of the things that we've talked about already. This is our main, this is the starting point. Everything that we've talked about today, you can find under surveys and programs. You can also just use the search engine to find this. If you want to Google or whatever search engine is your preference, population estimates or population projections, just make sure you include census or Census Bureau to make sure that it's taking you to the estimates or the projections that we've created. But this is our webpage. If you want to navigate from here, here are population estimates, here are population projections. I have all these tabs open because I was just afraid that while we were live, something would go terribly wrong. I lost power recently when I was giving a presentation. So population projections, it's a fairly straightforward, fairly simple web page. I don't have to go into too much depth. I think any of you that come here will be able to navigate it fairly easily. Data over here is where you're going to get actual data sets. We're going to walk through some of those as well. Any of the newer releases or newer visualizations, other related information will be here. This will be the most kind of current, flashiest, for lack of a better term, information that we have related to them. And as you'll see here, the 2019 is the most recent. If you go to data, this is where you can pull down the different data sets. So we've got the data sets, the tables, and then notes. I'm going to go to tables. This is a pretty easy and manageable section. 2019, you've got alternative scenarios. So those are the high and low immigration, and then the main series. I've got some spreadsheets pull up. We're going to walk through these, but I just wanted you to understand the basic navigation here. Here are the different data sets going back in time that are available. And I do want to mention, this is something that the Census Bureau projections specifically, Census Bureau's changed and are constantly adjusting how we release and what we release because there are so many other awesome data sources, and we're lucky enough to work with a lot of the state data centers around the country that produce some really good state projections as well. And I just wanted to say that because for your specific state, you might have other resources that are available too. Some of these are a little bit higher level, more of an overview or national or state level. For if you're looking for more lower level or more granular data, your state data centers in your area are a really good resource as well. Here's our population estimates and housing units page. There's a lot of really good information here. So very similar to our projections webpage, you have kind of your highest, most flashy, if that's the right word to be using with a government agency's data release pages, but the more flashy, more up-to-date information we have. So the newest tables, the newest data sets, and then, oh, wrong button. And then here's our release schedule, which was on that PowerPoint, but if you want to come back and look at it. Then we've got our press releases as well. To look at the data here, actually, let me touch on one more thing. Here's your technical documentation. This is where you can find that 15-page, but it's a really good 15-page document on methodology if you really want to understand some of the ins and outs. For some people, that those details matter. For some, just having the data is more your speed. If you want the data for, here's a link on geographies, but I'll show you some other resources as well. If you want to get the data from the population estimates, again, this looks very similar. Here are the tables, which I think are going to be the most useful and most commonly accessed. You just come to this page and choose whichever one feels let you know it applies most specifically to you. So I'll show you just what these look like. We have the methodology papers, which are very useful, and they are not as scary as some of our other ones. We do have methodology papers elsewhere that are hundreds of pages, and I love them, but I know that that's not everybody's cup of tea. So we'll have a methodology page, we'll have the actual estimates, and then we'll have some other information about how to use these files. Because I just wanted to not be downloading it, this is an example of what our data from the population estimates program looks like. So you'll start out with, these are GIS markers. If you're a GIS person, you know what they are. If you aren't, it might not matter. But then we also have a name, a little more human and user-friendly. We have the estimate base. So that's the base that we were talking about earlier with those different inputs. And then a lot of the different variables across the top. I wanted to, covering this, here we go. This is what the PDF looks like, which will tell you what each of those individual variables are, because they are not always just super intuitive to human beings in general. But so that's what these are across the top, and that PDF is always going to be available right next to that data set. So you don't have to worry about trying to memorize any of these or struggling through it. We have that there for you. We'll start with the biggest geography. We usually go top down, so we've got the United States, then we have the regions, we have the states, all the way down through Puerto Rico, and there's just an alphabetical order. Like I said, on the 24th of March, we'll be releasing the county and place and micro and metropolitan statistical areas for the same data set. So I actually think it's great that we're having this conversation I've been talking to myself, but in general, we're having this webinar right before that next release, because I think in a lot of ways, that's the release that a lot of people wait on to understand what's happening in their community. Sorry that my little overlay here is covering there. It finally went away. I do want to touch really briefly on, again, this is such a user-friendly website that I don't feel like we have to go into a lot of depth, but we do, in conjunction with several other statistical agencies in the U.S. and nationwide, produce information on not only the United States, but we have information or projections on different countries. This can get really complex on how they are, just because every country has their own administrative records. Everyone has different data sources. You could literally spend days and days and days, because I think there's like there it is, 227 countries. But there's some really cool things here. So not only do we have the dashboard, right now it's defaulted to the world, but you can choose a country from this list, and you can scroll through it. Let's just go to Afghanistan. I always feel like I have to take on the A, either A states, A countries, whatever it is, or A counties. But you can look at just some basic information. Then you can also go into different, we have tables, maps, population that's broken down by age, and then trends. These are estimates, these are projections. There are different sources. For the ones you'll see here, they're the Census Bureau, but some of the inputs are different depending on the country. So I at least wanted to touch on it. Last but not least, QuickFacts is a great place to get information, not only from the Population Estimates Program, but some of the other programs we have. And this is a great time for me to bring in and just mention some of the other data sources that we do have. So QuickFacts is one of my favorite if you're just looking for basic information about an area. I scrolled up too much. So you can look at states, counties, cities, towns, or zip codes, and it'll give you an overview of that area. So it'll always default to the United States, but you can actually add columns over here. So if you want to have the United States and then Florida and then Miami, it'll have them all lined up in columns, which is a great way to compare, your place to your county to the country. So you can really, what does it mean that 6% of the population is 5 years and under? Is that more or less than it is where you are? So you can get a lot of those different, you can get that relativism, like you can understand how you compare to other areas and make decisions based on that. Right here, we have the population estimate base. When the new data comes out, this is automatically updated depending on the data source. But I just thought this was worth talking about. It also is a great chance to touch on some of our other data sources. So the decennial census is a big one. I don't think there's a whole lot to touch on there. I think most people are aware of it. It is the once a decade count of all of the humans and households in the country. That is, most of you probably remember just 2 years ago, even if it was during a pandemic, going through that process. We just do that every 10 years. Then we have the American Community Survey, which is actually part of that same decennial census program, but it goes every month to every county or county equivalent in the country and produces annual estimates as well. That is it's a really great source for information about how people are living. So it's a survey, but it's a very big survey, and it can tell you about educational attainment, where people are working, things along those lines. And then we have population estimates, which are the official intercensal counts, but they are more limited in their data scope. So really race, ethnicity, origin, do you rent or own your home, and sex. So those are comparisons. All of those are pulled together here in QuickFacts, so it'll give you an overview of an area, and you won't necessarily have to worry about each data source. It'll bring them all in for you with the newest release of each of those data sources. And with that, I have been talking for 47 minutes, and I am going to stop doing that for now. Viviana, Carol, what other questions do we have? Otherwise, I'm going to share my contact information. Like I said, we'll get to any questions that you send us. I promise we will follow up on those, and you can always email me if there's something else.
Okay, right now I think we're at a place where some of these questions need to be answered a bit more individually than for the group.
Yeah, they're very detailed, I'm sure. Yeah, and that's what's fun about these data sets is that's a great problem to have, and I promise you I will focus on those over the next couple of days, so I understand. Very good. Then if there's nothing else, I've covered everything. I can't think of anything that I accidentally or intentionally skipped. So, Kim, I think with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
So thank you, everyone. I'd like to ask that you take this opportunity to fill out the evaluation. So thank you very much, Lacey, for this excellent presentation. Before we conclude,
thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Before we conclude, I'd like to thank everyone who played a role in today's webinar, and also, of course, thank you, the audience, for spending your time with us this afternoon. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation by following the link provided in the chat session. Look out for the recording and the PowerPoint of this presentation on the Census Academy by visiting census.gov/academy. We want to remind you that the next webinar in this series is called Your Community by the Numbers, Race, and Ethnicity. That will be on Tuesday, March 22nd at 2 p.m. Again, please take a few minutes to fill out the evaluation. We really want to hear how we're doing. That brings us to a close, so we thank you again and hope you have a great afternoon.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time